Welcome back. This is the Scaling Secrets podcast. Jeff Greenfield is here from jeffgreenfield.com. Jeff Greenfield is the CEO and co-founder of Prootics. He has over 3 decades of experience in strategy, growth, and marketing. He's known for solving the cookie issue for measurement, which enables marketers just like you to prove the impact from upper funnel channels like CTV. And Jeff is going to tell us about how we need to get on some of these ad tech issues and stay ahead of the game. That way we can scale our company, possibly be acquired, but just survive and thrive compared to some of maybe these either slower moving companies or just other organizations that are not as up to date or are not as nimble and agile as we are as a growing and scaling company. So Jeff, wonderful speaking with you today.
Oh, Robert, thank you so much for having me here on Scaling Secrets today. It's exciting to be here, especially talking about this issue that impacts most entrepreneurs today and everyone from smaller scaling brands all up to the much, much larger companies. This is a devastation time when it comes to the advertising industry.
And
Big
that's what they
time.
call it's called breaking news, right? This is
This is
important right now, and if you miss it, it's to your detriment. And so, what's happening? What's the huge problem facing us?
Well, we could call this the cookie apocalypse or the cookie collapse, but essentially the way that advertising has always functioned on the internet has always been about tracking individuals around. That's why when you go to a website and then you go to your Facebook feed or Instagram feed, you start to see similar ads, shoes that you were just shopping for, you may find similar shoes. And it's all about being able to track and profile users, and this started several years ago with GDPR in the UK and then the CCPA in California. All of these new privacy regulations have said, hey, you can't really track people like that. And there were changes made a couple of years ago in Safari, but the biggest change is coming up Q3 of this year, and that is Chrome, Google's browser, which is used by the vast majority of people around the world, and especially here in the US. They will no longer be passing on information about third-party cookies. And what that means is a devastation to how advertising functions. The way advertising in the internet industry functions is it's on a user-by-user basis. And it's been amazing. We've had a whole generation of marketers where we have been able to target individuals based upon their preferences, things they have liked. And that way you can make these decisions about building out these profiles. So it's really about building out very specific audiences. But that's all going away. Come Q3, you're not going to be able to target as sharply as you could before. And I'm sure there's a lot of folks who are listening who have already noticed changes that have been happening over the last year in their Facebook campaigns, where they log in and all of a sudden a Facebook campaign is no longer working because those targets are no longer there. Just to give you an example, several years ago, you used to be able to target Ford F-150 owners or leaseholders whose lease was going to expire within the next 3 months. Now that's very specific. So if you were an auto dealer and you're selling Ford or a competitive product, you could start targeting those people in Facebook. Well, that's been gone for a very long time. So what's happening is that we're now moving to the way things used to be before digital started, before the internet. We're moving to where we can still target, but it's going to be much, much broader. And actually, the reality is that's good news for marketers, because when you target broader, you actually end up targeting more people. But we have a whole generation of marketers and entrepreneurs that are used to targeting very specifically. And so what that means is that if you can't target at the user level anymore, you need to change the way you look at your media effectiveness. And so right now, when folks are like in GA or GA4 or Adobe, they're looking at individuals. So it's time to pan the camera back, and we have to look at things on a broader perspective in order to scale. So that's the big shift that's happening right now. And it's going to be a drastic shift for most of these folks. But as you alluded to there, Robert, the good news is that if you're a very fast moving company, if you're scaling, and what I mean by that is that in order to scale, you have to be agile, and you're bobbing and weaving. You're making changes a lot. You're spending a lot of time as a CEO recruiting folks. You're used to making changes quickly. And that's good news, because you have to start making changes for this. larger companies, some of the larger corporations like the big CPGs, the big brands, once you get over 1,000 employees, it can take a year or two or more in order to make changes. And that's actually good news for scaling companies that are very agile, because a lot of companies get acquired because they're able to incorporate these changes so quickly, not necessarily cookie, but other changes. But who knows? It could happen because you're able to move so quickly and understand the secrets of what's going on and how to react to them. But that's the big shift that's happening. That's the big breaking news for everyone.
And what I'm getting from this is that it's a test in a way, right? Like there's this cookie apocalypse, the cookie collapse, but it's not the first upending in the industry, and it won't be the last. And it's just a test in front of us where we need to figure out a way to change quickly and see the positive in things and see the benefit, and to not let this be yet another thing that's beating us up. You're reminding me of when the SEO geeks always would worry about, oh, well, Panda update number 3, or they would just, whenever, like a couple of times a year, whenever Google or who, and it usually seems to be Google who's just like upending us here, right? As far as they throw another wrench in the works, and everyone freaks out, and some people give up, but then the smart companies are the ones that adapt, adjust, and figure out a way to do things a lot better and faster, and to kind of have a different mindset. So when you're saying here that, well, that this whole past generation was used to just really micro targeting and saying, well, I'll target those F-150 owners whose lease is about to expire, and it's like shooting fish in a barrel, because I find them, they want it, it's not that much work. So by like panning the camera back, like you say, and looking at things broader, like, what does that mean? What should companies do as far as taking some new actions?
A great question, Robert. And you're absolutely right about the point that this is change. And for a lot of younger marketers, this is the biggest change they've ever seen. And what's important here is the big lesson to take away from this is to realize that you want to study this change so that you can understand and predict when the next one is going to happen, because there will be another one. It's going to continue going on. But you asked a great question in terms of what folks should do. Well, the number one thing that marketers should do is that every marketing team has like a Google Sheet, and it's got this daily data in there where it has every channel, how much money they spent, how many clicks they got, and how many sales or leads they got. And then they've got, the click-through rate calculated. They've got how much they spent, and then they've got their overall, their CAC, their cost of acquisition, or their ROAS numbers. And chances are that probably goes back the last several years. It's just one of these sheets, and someone started it and everybody keeps updating it. And it's focused solely on clicks. And this is the one big shift, is that if you notice, there are now all of these new advertising arenas, these channels like CTV, like podcast advertising, digital out of home, where there are no clicks. There's nothing to click on for CTV. On a podcast that you're listening to, there's nothing to click on. You can click to rewind the podcast, but there's not an ad. When you hear the ad, you can't click on it. So these things do not show up inside of your analytics. And so on this Google Sheet, you're going to see zero return for these things. And as a result, you're not going to be able to invest in them anymore because your CFO or finance person won't allow it. So the first change that I recommend that everyone do is go to that Google Sheet right now, add a new column, and call that column impressions. And what you want to do is you want to go back through the course, go back at least a year and add in the impressions for every single one of your channels, every single one of your campaigns, as detailed as you have it there, so that you know how many impressions you have in market every single day. The reason for this is that one of the things that's happened with this generation of marketers is there's confusion on what the job of marketing is. Most marketers believe you put money, you invest money into marketing, and the result is you're buying clicks that then lead to sales. That's not how marketing works. You put money, this is how marketing actually works. You invest money into marketing to buy impressions, which is media exposure. that leads to awareness. And then that awareness leads people to say, hey, I should come into their store. Now, that could be your store is retail, like a Target, or your store online, like your Shopify store or your website. And then that leads to sales. So for the last 20 or so years, Google and other publishers have been trying to get people focused on that lower funnel. The reason we do that, or that they've done that, is because that's where they make their money. That lower part of the funnel, you get people to bid against each other. But the reality is that you're really buying impressions. You're not buying clicks. And you'll probably have started to notice that some of the larger brands have already panned back the camera over the last year. They have gone away with just 100% direct marketing, and they're moving more towards branding. We've seen this with Airbnb and a lot of other larger brands with huge, huge success. So add in those impressions. And what you want to realize is that when you buy impressions on today, you're going to have a little bit of impact today, maybe a lot of impact, but there's this concept called advertising ad stock. And what that means is that the impressions you buy today are going to have an effect tomorrow, the next day, and the next day. And you could have an effect from ads you buy today that could last over the next 30 or 60 days, maybe even longer, depending upon how the messaging is. So you want to start looking at trends between not clicks and sales, but impressions and sales. That's probably the number one thing you can do now, is to start looking for those relationships. And what you'll find is there's a drag between when you put impressions in market and when you actually get sales. And that's going to start people educating them to understand, hey, I can buy CTV today, and it's going to in fact impact my sales today, but it also may impact my sales 3 or 4 weeks from now, even though the CTV is over. And that's what's important to understand, is that you're buying impressions that are driving awareness. That's really the key here.
That's a great insight, that there is more of a life cycle than we think, and that there are these different stages of awareness. And that's sort of what the retargeting was trying to accomplish anyway, right? When the ads follow you around. And it blows my mind also, Jeff, when you talk about things like retargeting to a non-marketing person, right? An average person, they don't understand it. They say, well, I went to such and such website, and what do you know? What a coincidence. Next thing I know, the exact thing I was searching for is following me around. And guys like you and me are saying, you were cookied, you were tagged. That's a marketing technique. But a lot of people just don't make the connection, or like when they're scrolling through their Facebook feed and they see these, like the sponsored posts, you and I say, oh, it's an ad. But like most people aren't catching on that there are other techniques at play, and that it might take all these extra touch points over weeks or months for it to finally convert over to, say, an in-store sale. Or it might have started from a podcast such as what you're doing right now, where there's nothing to click on. And so that's just kind of mind-blowing and amazing to think about, that we need to be looking at these other factors, not just clicks, but impressions as well. So that way we can sort of, we can't track as precisely as we would want to, but we can still kind of see, like, okay, if I put the extra ad spend here, then does it pay off? And so this is great ideas, concepts, theory we're talking about so far, but what's really exciting are the stories, right? And as we said, you've been at this for over 3 decades doing the strategy, growth, and marketing. So do you have a fun story to share with us about some of these changes you've been making, some of these adventures you've been having?
Yeah, what's interesting is that you talked about the ability with retargeting and the whole cooking aspect, and how we were living in this world where things were very, very specific. And back in the around 2008 is when I scaled up my first company, C3 Metrics, which was a multi-touch attribution company for large enterprise clients, and it was totally based on cookies. It was totally, we'd put tags on the website, put tags in the ads. And it was all about tracking individuals, not for showing them ads, but for measuring effectiveness. And it worked great. And I exited that company in 2019 thinking I would never, ever go back to measurement, ever, because I'd done everything I needed to do. And then all of a sudden, because of all these privacy regulations, things started to change. And then the bottom dropped out. And I realized that the technology that I had created in 2008, which was really all about leveraging big data, was no longer going to work. And there were no solutions in market. So that's when I started realizing well, maybe we can use some of the stuff from the past, what we used before the time of digital, and leverage the secrets of marketing mix modeling and be able to do them in a more rapid fashion. So I started building out Provalytics, but I faced this amazing thing that I had never faced before, which is something that a lot of founders face. But for me, I thought, hey, I can do this again. It's not a big deal. But I wasn't sure I could do it again because it was 2022 and I hadn't used those muscles since 2008. Because as you scale up a company as a founder, you're doing different things all the time. By the time you're up to 60 plus employees and generating significant revenue, you're not doing the same type of innovating that you were doing in the beginning. And so I faced this issue where I was concerned, can I actually do this again? Because it's like all of a sudden, if you haven't run a mile in 5 or 6 years and you go out and run it for the first time, you're like, oh my God, what the hell am I doing? I can't do this again. So for me, that was, as an entrepreneur, that was something that I had to face and get over. And it was, what I did is that I started talking to folks in my network. Just started networking just to find out what the concerns were, what were the things that they were facing, what were the challenges, and what were the fears that they had. And it was just through networking and having these conversations and also talking to my wife that I realized I can do this again. It's just a matter of kind of getting back on the bicycle. You never forget, but it's always interesting to go back many years later and try to start something up again. If you're doing this like every 3 or 4 years and starting up a company, it feels very fresh. But after that many years, it was a little nerve wracking to realize, oh my God, this is a little scary. I don't know if I can do it, especially as you get older. You get a little nervous as you get older, definitely.
Right, of working like getting those old muscles back to life. And so what sort of difficulties happened when you did that? I mean, like you said, like it's one thing to like start over every 3 or 4 years, but if you like so many years removed, when you go from 2008 to 2019, I mean, was it slow going? Did you have any false starts? Like what was it like as far as the missteps in getting your groove back, so to speak?
Yeah, it was more about trying to set like my schedule and being able to figure out, what the process was like. Because when I started C3 Metrics, it was like a machine gun. It was constant. It was all in. I was also much younger, but it was the type of thing where it was like 24/7. And I realized after going through that whole experience that if I'm going to do this again, I need to be able to be a lot healthier. And that was the other realization for me, is that I wasn't taking very good care of myself. Towards the end, I wasn't sleeping really well. I wasn't eating really well. I hadn't exercised in a couple of years. So I really focused. Once I realized, okay, I'm going to get back into this, one of the things that helped for me is that I really focused on getting 8 to 9 hours of sleep every single night. That's probably the number one thing. Made sure that the food that goes in my body is healthy, and make sure I get to the gym and exercise and move the body around. Because one of the problems that you have is you're growing a business, especially today. Most of the time you're staring at a screen like we are right now. And and that's not great. You're not really moving much. Even if you're standing, you're just standing. So being able to go out to the gym and getting moving, so I really focused on the idea of being healthy. Once I got back into that groove, that was the biggest thing for me. There's always false starts when you're starting up a company in terms of thinking one way and then you have to bob and move a bit around. I made sure that we built out the platform so that it was agile enough so that as we got feedback from our initial beta customers, that we could incorporate that feedback. One of the big surprising things for me is that when I built C3 Metrics, we built out dashboards so people could log in. People really wanted to be able to visualize the data and have it visualized for them. So when I built this out, I didn't have dashboards right away. All we had was the data in Excel that would get sent off to our customers. And I let them all know. I said, hey, listen, we're going to build out dashboards. Don't worry about it. There'll be a login and everything like that. And I was shocked to learn that every single one of them said, hey, that's great, but as long as I still get the Excel. And that's when I had this huge realization that one of the problems with analytics and data is that it has become so confusing for folks. In order for it to be actionable, part of my job is not only to have to make decisions, but I also have to inform people in my organization about what I'm doing and what are the insights from the data. In order to do that, I have to get the data into a format that I can use, into a PowerPoint so I can pass it on to the folks above me. And getting that data out of a dashboard is a lot of work. When I have it all available for me in one single Excel, it's easy for me to cut and paste, and I can create all the reports I need from it. And so we realized then that most of our folks already have dashboards, and they definitely don't want anything else to log into. So we actually didn't move forward with the dashboards because we didn't need them, because our clients were telling us we already have enough of these, keep the Excel. And so that's what we stuck with. And that to me was strange, because that was kind of backwards how things were back in the 2008, 2009, 2010. People loved dashboards, but now I think most people, we have too many.
Those are some interesting lessons. I mean, and as far as listening to your customers and how the trends change and things like swing one way and the other and back again, it's so weird. I mean, I imagine that, I mean, you and I are going to laugh if in 10 or 15 years they say, hey, we got a brand new thing. It's called cookies and retargeting. Imagine if they bring back what they took away, and the way that things are cyclical, especially with the internet, like it wouldn't surprise me at all. And so, and that's kind of, and also it makes me feel a little better, because sometimes I feel down on myself for not being proper enough. Maybe you can relate to this. Like sometimes they say, well, you need to only use your CRM and your automation and your dashboard and use the fancy systems. But sometimes you want to dig through the raw data just to get the exact kind of insight that you need. And so that's helpful to think like, okay, sometimes you do have to jump into the tables, maybe not all the time, but sometimes just dig into that raw data. And then because this is, the Scaling Secrets podcast, you think about what are the insights, or what do people mention a lot? And sometimes when you ask about, well, what's the secret to your scaling? People say things like, oh, well, having a good team, or having a good, like a good like system. I use my Six Sigma or my EOS, but that's a really good basic fundamental you mentioned there of taking care of yourself and self-care and being physically fit, and not killing yourself with 20-hour days. And especially, as you said, when you're in the older years, like sure, if you're 20 and pounding the caffeine and staying awake 3 days straight works, great. But if you're 50 or 60 or something, then maybe it's time to take care of your body a little bit more, so that way your mind works. And also, I'm sure that a lot of the problem solving and the good ideas come from the downtime, right? Like we all like say, oh, I don't have time to run or exercise, but you go for a run, and maybe you've been beating yourself up for solving this problem for 3 or 4 days. Go for a run, and just because you took yourself out of the problem, then you have that kind of that light bulb moment comes up, and you figure out a way through it. And so, that's a cool kind of journey transformation you've been on. And I also want to get from you, do you have anything that's like slightly brag worthy? Because you work with JP Morgan, US Bank, Fender, and I'm sure you put into place some sort of like innovative marketing strategy. So is there anything that to do like a little bit of a humble brag and tell us about like what have you done that's really like move the needle and change things for some of these big companies you work with?
Well, I'll go back to some of the coolest things. Well, first off, I'll brag a little bit about some of our clients are really surprised to find out what's moving the needle for them. Some of the channels. Smart marketers are the ones that are always running tests. They're putting a little money here. They're putting a little money here. They're testing TikTok. They're testing X or Twitter. They're testing all these different places. And for me, it's exciting when they have this aha moment, like, oh my God, I thought that was going to work, but I didn't think it was going to work that much. That's just amazing. And then all of a sudden you see strategy shift over. You see them be able to go to their CFO and get specific budget and increase their marketing spend based on the findings of that. That to me is the sexiest thing about this. That to me is the absolute coolest thing. But prior to this, my little humble brag is I did work in the world of product placement, where you would put stuff in television, and in the world of branded entertainment, where you would go and companies that would want to create their own entertainment, if you will, as a way of improving their marketing. So one of my humble brags is I created a program for Verizon Wireless called How Sweet the Sound. Verizon Wireless many years ago was a growing brand as it is now, but it wasn't doing well in the African American community. In fact, every dollar that they spent in marketing in the African American community, they would actually lose market share, because the perception of the brand was, you're not for us. So we're not going to. So the more money they spent, they would actually lose market share. And they tried everything. This program, How Sweet the Sound, was actually based on American Idol. It was an American Idol style contest for church choirs. It was tested in Memphis, did really, really well, won an Effie Award, and then toured the country and actually even appeared on the Gospel Musical Channel. So that's one of my brags, is the creator of that. Very excited, very proud of that. And it raised market share for them more so than any other program they ever did.
Sounds like a lot of fun. And how did you come up with that sort of solution? Like that seems like a lot of randomness, but I like the part where you kind of you proved it, you figured out like the evidence you showed that worked, and you rolled it out more. But how did you think of this whole American Idol choir sort of solution to the problem?
Well, I was fascinated by American Idol in terms of how they grew, and did a little work back in the early days with some of the first generation, the first season contestants, the folks who won, and was learning about how the PR engine behind American Idol worked. They were very specific about the towns that they went to, and very specific about people who made it through the separate rounds in the audition process, specifically so they could issue press releases in each of those towns, so that every medium-sized town in the US would have people that were involved. People would be rooting for the folks in their state, and they would get people involved all throughout the entire process. And I did this same thing as well for a pharmaceutical company. There was a pharmaceutical company that was facing a competitor. They were a company called Medicis, and Medicis created a sister product to Botox, one of these fillers. And they had had this product for 3 years. They were the only product in the country, the only filler that was available. And they were a B2B to C company. So, they sold to physicians who then sold to patients. So patients were not brand specific. They just knew fillers worked for them. All of a sudden, their competitor is on the fast track to get approval for a competitive product. And they've already gone to doctors offering them discounts if they buy the Botox and their filler at the same time. So they're about to see their market be destroyed. So did a similar type of program based upon the research I'd done on American Idol, which is we did this contest called Hottest Mom in America. And Hottest Mom in America targeted cities that were strategically important for them. And we did an American Idol style contest for the hottest mom in America. The first city that we did was Dallas. And people showed it at 1 o'clock in the morning, lined up around the block. Thousands of people would show up. And we toured this all over the country, did about 6 cities. And so this concept works really well. You'll see other brands that have done this, especially for a national brand where you're trying to build momentum. So American Idol, it definitely works really, really well. I knew though that for Verizon Wireless, they needed to have something that was authentic to the African American community, and church and religion and faith is authentic. So the only place that we were going to be able to make it happen was through the church. And I thought, church choirs are amazing. Just the music from them are absolutely incredible, and they haven't gotten the the star status that regular singers get and were getting at the time through American Idol. So I thought this would be really cool to do, and it worked out amazing.
It sounds like it did. And it's always so fun just to kind of hear about someone's thought process and problem solving. And like the lesson I'm getting from, well, I'm getting 2 lessons from these adventures you've had. One is how important it is to be curious, especially about someone's process that you normally wouldn't be involved in, right? Like who would even dive deep and say, okay, well, why is American Idol making these decisions with the cities and the press releases and the way they do these sort of micro launches? And I think there's definitely a huge benefit in just seeing how someone makes money and what their decision and thought process is. Like, you think about, okay, you walk into some restaurant, it's set up this way, they have these tables, they serve you in this way. Like, why do they do that? What were those decisions? It's always kind of fun to have that sort of curiosity. And then the other lesson I get from you is, if you figured out something that works, then, I mean, don't just let it die in the past. That might be a technique that you can use and resurrect years or decades later, and everyone will think that you're a genius because you invented something. But it's like, well, you tried that 5 or 6 years ago and it worked, and you had the evidence, and you just applied it in a new way. That's just fascinating to think about, playing with these ideas in this sort of way. And so, as we're beginning to wind down our conversation here, Jeff, like, what do you see happening in the future? Like, do you think this whole cookie apocalypse, is that just so that way Google and Facebook can use AI, and they can choose what ads to serve? Like, they're taking the privacy in their own hands? Like what's happening there, as far as like what will replace the cookie apocalypse? And then just what do you see happening in general in the future, as far as internet marketing, advertising? What's in store for all of us?
So what's going to happen is this concept of what we call walled gardens, where it's a whole contained environment. A great example of that is Amazon. All the data stays within Amazon. Same is true of Walmart.com. Facebook is its own walled garden. They don't let information out. You can give information to them, but they're not going to let information out. So if you want to target Facebook people on Amazon, you really can't do that. And so what's been happening is all these walled gardens have done very well by keeping their information contained, and Google has not done that yet. So this is the final move for Google to become kind of their own walled garden. You can put information in, but it's going to be difficult to come out. And the difficulty for marketers is that as I'm scaling a brand, I'm doing my advertising to drive people to my store, let's say online, but now I'm on Amazon. I'm selling there, and I'm selling on Walmart.com. How do I know what's going on? I'm spending money to drive people to my website. I'm spending Amazon money. There has to be a halo effect, and there is a halo effect across those, but you're not going to be able to measure it using the techniques that you use now or what you've used in the past. Interestingly enough, Robert, based upon everything that we've said, the techniques that we use at Provalytics to measure these, even though it's machine learning and it's AI, the underlying theories and statistical methods, one, which is called Bayesian, is from the 1700s. The other, a technique called seemingly unrelated regressions, is from the late 60s. So just like how you said, they're going to bring back cookies again, we are bringing back techniques that have actually been around for a long time. In fact, most of the AI is being driven by Bayesian-like techniques, all from a formula from the 1700s. I mean, that's what's amazing. So literally, computing power is now caught up to the point where this formula can really be utilized in an amazing fashion to do incredible things. And that's what we're able to do, is be able to kind of look over these walled gardens and look at the big picture, but make it actionable enough so marketers can make those kind of on the ground decisions of what's working, what's not working, and where I should be spending my next dollar. So at the end of the day, it's going to be more difficult for marketers to know where to spend your next dollar because of all these walled gardens.
And we need to navigate that, but it can be frustrating to try to navigate that on our own, right? We run out of time. By the time we even get close to figuring it out, then they've changed their algorithm again, or with all the chess pieces on the board, this person's making their walled garden, this person's making these drastic changes. It can be really it can be an exercise in frustration for us to just stay on top of what's happening, what's about to happen. And I can see how it could really help to have a buddy in this entrepreneurship business growth journey to figure these sorts of things out. And so how does Provalytics fit into that? Like, what does Provalytics provide specifically, and how does someone know if they're a right fit for you?
Well, the best way to know if you're right fit is if you're, number one, is that if you're in multiple marketing channels. So you're on Facebook, you're on Google, you're in Amazon, you're spending money on CTV, out of home, maybe you're doing even catalog or print, and you're spending more than 20 to $25 million a year, then Provolytics is a perfect fit for you. Provolytics comes in, takes in all of the data at a non-user level. So it's no PII data. It takes in all the data on what you're spending on marketing, what your sales and your orders are, what your KPIs are, and then prints out for you essentially a map on what you should do next. So it looks at not only reporting, gives you a proper breakdown or attribution of what's driving what, and then tells you what you should be doing next, where you should be spending your next dollar. If you want to raise your budget, where should you put it so you can get more sales, more leads, more conversions overall? That's what Provolytics does.
Fantastic. And we need this, right? We need to make these smarter, data-driven decisions. We can't just sit around and hope that what we've done in the past will continue to work. We can't leave it to chance, randomness, outside factors. We need to take control of our own data and use these services, these tools such as what Provolytics provides. And so how does someone find it? What's the call to action, website address, next step?
Go to provolytics.com. Go and check it out there. You can connect with me as well on LinkedIn. And also for any listeners that want to understand all of these changes that are going on with cookies, because the big drastic change is on attribution and measurement. You can go to provolytics.com. We have an attribution certification program that we put together at no cost. It goes through what's going on, how we got to where we are. It even goes over like really cool trivia things, like most marketers understand what a UTM code is, like UTM source, but most people don't understand that UTM actually stands for Urchin Tracking Module, which is the company that Google acquired, Urchin, which became originally Google Analytics. And so, even a big company like Google keeps kind of the base code there. That's why we still have UTM codes to this day. So it goes over everything. It takes about an hour, hour and a half to go through, and you end up with a great certificate to put on LinkedIn. But more than anything else, it'll strengthen your foundation as a marketer to understand how we got to where we are and why all this stuff is happening.
Very interesting. And we need to know this stuff. We need to know the past and understand the future. And that is Jeff Greenfield. Find him on social media, find him on LinkedIn, and provolytics.com. That's provolytics.com. And as we completely close our conversation here, Jeff, it's always fun to end with some parting words of advice or a soundbite or something. So does anything come to mind as far as a quote or lesson to make us feel good, to make us feel informed and send us on our way?
I would say my number one thing is make sure you have a notebook by your bed each night, because when you talked about those great thoughts and ideas that come out when you run, for me, they show up in the middle of the night. And sometimes you wake up and you forget them. So you can open it up. So write down your thoughts in the middle of the night, because as an entrepreneur, your number one thing is to solve problems. And you're going to find that most of your problems are going to be solved between sleep and awake. So make sure you have that notebook and pen there.
Capture those subconscious ideas and solutions. Love it. So as we're thinking about what to do for the future and what habits to change, what actions to take, the very first thing you should do, even before closing this podcast or even before getting up to get a cup of water, go to provolytics.com. That's one of those ideas that if you don't do it right away, you might lose it. So provolytics.com is the place to go. Jeff Greenfield, wonderful talking to you.
Thank you so much, Robert. Pleasure to talk to you as well, too.